Listen carefully. The year 2026 is not coming to save you. It's coming to expose you, what you avoided, what you postponed, what you pretended not to see. 2026 will bring it all to the surface. Stay with me till the end, because the final lessons may completely change how you see your life, your fears and your future. Many of you feel it already. A strange restlessness, a quiet anxiety that doesn't go away even when everything looks fine. You're working, scrolling, achieving, surviving, but deep inside something feels off. Not because you're failing, but because your soul knows something is shifting. Osho warned us that humanity would reach a crossroads, not because the world would end, but because illusions would. And 2026 is not a random year. It is a turning point. So today, I want to walk with you through 7 life lessons, 7 inner steps that can either break you or awaken you. And if you think the first lessons are powerful, don't leave before the last ones, because that's where the real transformation begins. Comfort once felt like safety. It felt like the reward for surviving chaos, struggle, and uncertainty. Humanity was taught that if you work hard enough, obey long enough, fit in long enough, one day you'll earn a soft place to land, a predictable routine, a stable income, a life where nothing shakes you too deeply. And for a while, this belief worked, or at least it seemed to. But Osho warned us that comfort is not a teacher forever. There comes a moment when comfort stops protecting you and starts imprisoning you. In 2026, that moment becomes impossible to ignore. You may already feel it. The life you carefully built doesn't feel wrong, but it doesn't feel alive either. The habits that once grounded you now feel mechanical. You wake up, follow the script, meet expectations, and go to sleep with a strange sense that something essential is missing. Not dramatic pain, not obvious suffering, just a quiet dullness that no vacation, no entertainment, no distraction seems to cure. This is where people misunderstand discomfort. They think discomfort means something has gone wrong. Osho saw it differently. He said discomfort is often the first sign that something has finally gone right, because comfort numbs awareness, but discomfort sharpens it. When life becomes too comfortable, you stop questioning, you stop listening inwardly, you stop evolving, you repeat the same year again and again and call it stability. But the soul doesn't grow in padded rooms. It grows in moments of friction, uncertainty, and inner restlessness. In 2026, many people will feel this friction intensify. Not because the world is cruel, but because consciousness is asking for expansion. Comfort will no longer give you answers. The routines that once soothed you will start to irritate you. The familiar will feel heavy. The safe path will feel strangely unsafe. And this will confuse many, because they were told that success looks calm, controlled, and predictable. But growth has never been predictable. Growth has always been disruptive. Think about it honestly. Every major transformation in your life began with discomfort. The moment you outgrew a mindset, the moment a relationship no longer fit, the moment a belief cracked. At the time it felt painful, destabilizing, even frightening. But later you realized it was necessary. Comfort would have kept you small. Discomfort forced you to expand. Osho warned that a time would come when humanity would have to choose between unconscious comfort and conscious discomfort. And that time is now. In 2026, comfort will no longer hide emptiness. It will expose it. People will sit in beautiful homes with full schedules and full screens and still feel hollow, not because they lack gratitude, but because they lack presence. This lesson is not telling you to abandon your life or chase suffering. It's inviting you to stop resisting the signals. When something feels uncomfortable, don't rush to numb it. Sit with it. Ask what it's pointing toward. Discomfort is not asking you to destroy your life. It's asking you to redesign it from truth instead of fear. Many will panic when comfort breaks down. They'll cling harder to old patterns, old identities, old distractions. But those who understand this lesson will do something different. They will slow down. They will listen. They will allow discomfort to become a compass instead of an enemy. Because discomfort has intelligence. It appears when you've stayed too long in a version of life that no longer reflects who you are becoming. It whispers, there is more. And if you ignore it long enough, it eventually shouts. If this resonates with you, stay with me. The next lessons go even deeper, because once comfort loses its authority, identities begin to crumble, and that is where real awakening starts. Don't miss what's coming next. The real turning point is just beginning. When comfort begins to crack, the first thing that trembles is identity. Not the surface identity that you show strangers, but the deeper one, the story you tell yourself about who you are and why you matter. Osho warned us that most human suffering does not come from pain itself, but from attachment to false identities. And in 2026, these identities will no longer hold. For years, many people define themselves through roles, a job title, a social label, a family expectation, an online persona carefully curated to earn approval. These identities once provided direction and belonging. They gave structure. They answered the question, who am I? Quickly enough to silence deeper inquiry. But they were borrowed answers, not lived truths. Now something is shifting. People are waking up one morning and realizing that the label they worked so hard to earn feels strangely empty. The applause doesn't land the same way. The recognition fades faster. The mask feels heavier than the face beneath it. And this creates fear, because when entity collapses, the mind panics. It asks, if I'm not this, then who am I? Osho said, this moment is unavoidable for anyone moving toward awareness. The false self must fall apart before the real self can emerge. But most people resist this phase because it feels like losing ground. It feels like becoming nobody, and the ego would rather suffer than disappear. In 2026, many will feel lost without knowing why. They'll say, I don't recognize myself anymore. They'll feel disconnected from their old ambitions. They'll question paths they once defended passionately. This is not confusion, it is disillusionment. And disillusionment, though uncomfortable, is a blessing. It means illusion is losing its grip. Think about how exhausting it is to maintain an identity that isn't rooted in truth. You have to constantly defend it, prove it, compare it, adjust it based on how others respond. That's why people feel drained even when they're successful. They're carrying a version of themselves that requires constant maintenance. When that identity begins to collapse, there is grief. Don't underestimate it. You grieve the future you imagined. You grieve the validation you expected. You grieve the certainty you once had. But beneath that grief is space, and space is sacred. Space is where authenticity begins. Osho never asked people to destroy their roles. He asked them not to confuse roles with reality. You can play a role without becoming it. You can participate in society without loss. In yourself inside it. But when you forget this distinction, Life becomes a performance instead of an experience. In 2026, performance will fail. People will sense when something is real and when it's rehearsed. And more importantly, you will sense it within yourself. You will no longer be able to lie to yourself without feeling the cost immediately in the form of anxiety, emptiness, or restlessness. This is why so many will attempt to rebuild their old identities quickly. They'll jump into new labels, new trends, new belief systems, anything to avoid sitting in the unknown. But Osho taught that the unknown is not a void. It is a womb. It feels dark because something new is forming. If you are in a phase where you feel undefined, uncertain, or unmotivated by things that once excited you, don't rush to fix it. Don't label it as failure. This is the pause between who you were conditioned to be and who you are becoming consciously. Stay with this lesson because the next one explains why emotional exhaustion follows identity collapse and why that exhaustion is not a breakdown but a message. If you leave now, you'll miss the deeper understanding that makes this phase meaningful instead of frightening. The journey is unfolding exactly as it should. After identity begins to loosen its grip, exhaustion arrives, not suddenly, but quietly. It settles into your body and mind in ways that are difficult to explain. You still function, you still show up, but something inside you feels drained beyond sleep, beyond rest, beyond motivation. Osho warned us about this phase. He said people would mistake it for weakness, depression, or failure, when in truth it is a signal of misalignment. This exhaustion is different from physical tiredness. Physical tiredness disappears with rest. This kind of exhaustion lingers. It shows up as irritability without reason, numbness toward things you once cared about, and a strange heaviness in moments that should feel joyful. And because modern culture worships productivity, people feel ashamed of this state. They push harder. They consume stimulants, distractions, validation, anything to override the signal. But Osho never taught suppression. He taught listening. Emotional exhaustion is not telling you to stop living. It is telling you to stop pretending. Every time you live against your inner truth, you leak energy. Every time you say yes to what your being resists, something within you tightens. And over time, this constant inner conflict drains you far more than effort ever could. Many people believe they are tired because they are doing too much. In reality, they are tired because they are doing too much of what doesn't belong to them. Borrowed ambitions, inherited expectations, unquestioned beliefs. You can survive like this for years, even decades, but eventually awareness demands honesty, and exhaustion is its messenger. In 2026, this exhaustion will become widespread because pretending will become unbearable. He will move faster, louder, more demanding, yet inner tolerance for falsehood will shrink. People will burn out not because life is too hard, but because life is too misaligned. And this burnout will not be solved by vacations or entertainment. It requires inner correction. Think about how peaceful it feels when you act in alignment, even if the action is difficult. Hard work done consciously energizes you. Meaningful struggle strengthens you, but meaningless effort empties you. That difference is crucial. Osho reminded us that energy flows when action and awareness move together. When they separate, fatigue becomes inevitable. This is why some people feel exhausted even in comfort, while others feel alive in challenge. It is not the circumstance, it is the connection to truth. Exhaustion is not asking you to quit everything, it is asking you to question everything, to examine where your life is running on habit instead of awareness. Children rarely experience this kind of exhaustion. They get tired, yes, but they recover quickly. Why? Because they express what they feel honestly. They rest without guilt. They play without performance. Exhaustion enters adulthood, the moment we begin managing an image instead of honoring a feeling. Osho would say, when you are exhausted, don't ask how to regain energy. Ask where you are divided. Where are you saying one thing and feeling another? Where are you living for approval instead of truth? Where are you forcing yourself instead of flowing? If you listen carefully, exhaustion softens, not immediately but gradually. The moment you stop fighting it and start understanding it, something shifts. You stop labeling yourself as broken. You stop judging your lack of enthusiasm. You become curious instead of critical. And curiosity is the beginning of healing. If this resonates with you, stay with me. The next lesson explains why silence becomes essential during this phase and how stepping back from noise restores clarity and strength. Don't leave now. The most transformative insights are still unfolding, and missing them would mean misunderstanding this phase entirely. When exhaustion reaches its peak, the instinct is to look outward for answers, to talk more, to consume more, to stay busy so you don't have to feel the weight inside. But Osho warned that at this stage, noise becomes poison. He said there would come a time when silence would no longer be a luxury or a spiritual hobby. It would become survival. In earlier years, silence was optional. You could avoid it, fill every moment with sound, conversation, stimulation. But in 2026, silence becomes unavoidable for those who want clarity. Not external silence alone, but inner stillness. A willingness to stop reacting and start witnessing. The world will not become quieter. In fact, it will become louder, more opinionated, more chaotic. Everyone will be certain. Everyone will be speaking. Everyone will be trying to pull you into their version of true. And if you are not anchored in silence, you will mistake noise for wisdom and urgency for importance. Osho said silence is not emptiness. It is presence without interference. It is the space where you can hear what has always been speaking beneath the surface. Most people fear silence because it removes distractions, and distractions have been protecting them from uncomfortable truths. When silence arrives, so does honesty. At first, silence feels restless. Your mind rebels. It wants stimulation, answers, reassurance. It brings up unfinished emotions, unresolved fears, half-lived desires. This is why many people abandon silence quickly. They say it makes them uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not caused by silence. It is revealed by it. Silence doesn't create confusion. It exposes it. In 2026, those who learn to sit with themselves, without fixing, without escaping, will develop a strength that cannot be shaken. Not loud strength, quiet strength. The kind that doesn't need to defend itself. The kind that allows you to respond instead of react. Osho warned that reaction would dominate the unconscious masses. People would live in constant emotional reflex, outrage, fear, comparison, validation seeking. Silence breaks this cycle. It inserts a pause between stimulus and response. And in that pause, freedom appears. This is why silence becomes power. Not because it makes you passive, but because it makes you precise. When you are silent inwardly, you see clearly. You notice what matters and what doesn't. You stop wasting energy on meaningless battles. You stop absorbing other people's chaos. Silence teaches you how to be alone without feeling lonely. And this is crucial because in 2026, many relationships, structures, and beliefs will shift. If you depend on constant external reassurance, you will feel lost. But if you're rooted in silence, you will feel steady even when everything else moves. Osho never promoted isolation. He promoted inner independence. Silence gives you that independence. It reminds you that your center does not come from agreement, applause, or belonging. It comes from awareness. There is something deeply healing about allowing life to unfold without commentary, to watch thoughts rise and fall without clinging, to feel emotions without naming them problems. In silence, exhaustion begins to dissolve, not because circumstances change, but because resistance does. Many people think silence means withdrawing from life. In truth, it allows you to re-enter life with clarity. You speak less, but with more meaning. You act less, but with more intention. You listen more, not just to others, but to yourself. If you are feeling overwhelmed, scattered, or emotionally noisy, this lesson is not asking you to escape the world. It is asking you to stop drowning in it. Even moments of silence, real silence, recalibrate the nervous system and restore inner order. Stay with me. The next lesson reveals how courage is reborn after S. Silence not as drama or rebellion, but as quiet, unshakable truth. If you think silence is powerful, wait until you understand what conscious courage looks like. After silence settles within you, something unexpected happens. You don't become louder. You don't become aggressive. You don't feel the need to prove yourself. Instead, a different kind of strength emerges, one that doesn't announce itself. Osho warned that in the coming years, courage would stop looking heroic. It would no longer come with applause, recognition, or dramatic gestures. It would become quiet, ordinary, and deeply personal. For a long time, society glorified visible courage, the kind that confronts, defies, rebels, the kind that makes noise. But Osho said that was the courage of the ego, still dependent on reaction and validation. The courage that matters in times of awakening is subtle. It's the courage to live truthfully when no one is watching. In 2026, courage will be tested not in moments of crisis, but in moments of choice. The choice to say no without justification, the choice to walk away from what no longer aligns, even if it looks successful from the outside. The choice to disappoint others rather than betray yourself. This kind of courage doesn't feel dramatic. It feels lonely at first. Silence prepares you for this loneliness. When you are no longer addicted to noise, you stop craving constant agreement. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You realize that being misunderstood isn't the same as being wrong. And this realization is terrifying for the ego, because the ego survives on reflection, on how it appears through others' eyes. Osho taught that true courage is the willingness to stand alone in your clarity, not in arrogance, not in rebellion, but in rootedness. You are not against others, you are with yourself. And this distinction changes everything. Many people in 2026 will struggle because they will try to practice courage without silence. They will react instead of respond. They will confuse impulsiveness with authenticity. But courage born from silence is different. It is slow, it is grounded, it does not rush to prove anything. This courage shows up in small, almost invisible ways. You stop overcommitting, you stop chasing conversations that drain you. You stop adjusting your truth to maintain comfort. And each time you do this, something inside you relaxes. You may lose approval, but you gain integrity. Osho warned that the most painful regret in life is not failure, it is self-betrayal. And in 2026, this regret will surface sharply. People will realize how many years they lived according to fear disguised as responsibility, how often they chose safety over sincerity, how frequently they silenced their inner voice to avoid discomfort. Courage now means listening to that voice even when it trembles, even when it contradicts logic, even when it leads you away from familiar ground. This is not reckless courage, it is conscious courage. T moves with awareness, not adrenaline. And here is the paradox Osho loved to point out. The more courageous you become inwardly, the less you need to fight externally. You stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop defending your choices. You let your life speak for itself. This courage also reshapes your relationship with fear. Fear doesn't disappear, it loses authority. You feel it, but you don't obey it blindly. You recognize it as a protective instinct, not a ruler. Silence gives you the space to observe fear without becoming it. If this lesson is landing, don't leave now. The next one reveals how relationships transform when courage and awareness meet, and why many connections will either deepen or dissolve in 2026. Missing this insight would leave the journey incomplete. The most intimate transformation is still ahead. When courage becomes quiet and rooted, it inevitably changes how you relate to others. Osho warned that relationships would become one of the greatest testing grounds of awareness in the coming years. Not because love would disappear, but because unconscious attachment would no longer survive. In 2026, relationships will stop being places to hide and start becoming mirrors. For a long time, people used relationships to escape themselves, to feel validated, to feel needed, to feel less alone without actually being present. Many connections were built not on love, but on mutual dependency. Two fears holding each other, ND calling it connection. And while this worked for a while, it was never sustainable. As awareness grows, tolerance for false intimacy fades. You begin to feel when a relationship is nourishing you and when it is draining you. You sense when conversations are alive and when they are repetitive loops of the past. And this awareness is uncomfortable because it removes the option of unconscious comfort. Osho said, relationships do not fail because people change. They fail because people refuse to change consciously. In 2026, this refusal becomes costly. You will no longer be able to maintain closeness by pretending. If you are present, the relationship deepens. If you are absent, it dissolves. There is very little middle ground. Many will experience this as loss. Friendships will fade. Romantic bonds will shift. Family dynamics will feel strained. And the mind will label this as separation, abandonment, or breakdown. But Osho would remind us that not every ending is a failure. Some endings are corrections. Relationships reflect your level of awareness. When you were unconscious relationships felt comfortable. As you become more conscious, those same relationships feel heavy. This doesn't mean anyone is wrong. It means you are no longer vibrating at the same depth, and forcing harmony where awareness has diverged creates suffering. In 2026, people will be forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. You cannot grow deeply and remain connected to everything that once defined you. Growth requires honesty, and honesty reshapes bonds. Some relationships will rise with you, becoming more authentic, more spacious, more real. Others will quietly fall away. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. Osho taught that love is not possession, it is presence. When presence disappears, only attachment remains. And attachment always fears loss. because it is built on insecurity. Conscious relationships, on the other hand, allow freedom. They do not cling, they do not demand. They meet, share, and let each other be. Many people in 2026 will try to save relationships by sacrificing themselves. They will stay silent to keep peace. They will suppress truth to avoid conflict. But this only delays the inevitable. A relationship that requires self-betrayal to survive is already collapsing. Just slowly, awareness brings courage into relationships. The courage to speak honestly without aggression. The courage to listen without defensiveness. The courage to walk away without bitterness. And this courage hurts at first because it challenges old patterns of pleasing, fixing, and rescuing. But something remarkable happens when you stop using relationships as emotional shelters. You begin to meet others more cleanly. You stop expecting them to complete you. You stop blaming them for your inner emptiness. And from this space, real intimacy becomes possible. Not the intimacy of dependency, but the intimacy of two whole beings sharing space. Osho warned that many would feel lonely during this transition. And yes, there is a phase where you feel between worlds, no longer comfortable in old connections, not yet settled into new ones. But this loneliness is not punishment. It is refinement. It teaches you how to be with yourself without distraction. If you can stay present through this phase, relationships stop being survival strategies and start becoming conscious choices. You choose people not out of fear, but out of resonance. And that changes everything. After comfort dissolves, identities loosen, exhaustion speaks, silence deepens, courage matures, and relationships realign. There is nowhere left to escape. This is the moment Osho warned us about most clearly. He said a time would come when awakening would no longer be a luxury, a spiritual hobby, or a personal preference. It would become necessary. In 2026, consciousness itself becomes the turning point. For centuries, humanity survived largely unconsciously, reacting, repeating, inheriting beliefs, following crowds. And this worked to a degree. But Osho said, unconscious living has a limit. When complexity increases and awareness does not, suffering multiplies. That is what we are witnessing now. In 2026, life will move too fast for unconsciousness. Decisions will carry consequences more quickly. Emotional reactions will spiral faster. Old coping mechanisms will fail. And people will feel overwhelmed, not because life is cruel, but because they are living on autopilot in a world that demands presence. Awakening does not mean becoming spiritual in appearance. It means becoming alert. It means seeing clearly what is happening inside you as it happens. Not tomorrow, not after reflection. Now. This is what most people resist, because awareness removes excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances when you see your reactions forming in real time. Osho said, awakening is dangerous to the ego because the ego survives on unconsciousness. It feeds on habit, repetition, and identification. Awareness exposes it. And this is why many people fear awakening without knowing it. They distract themselves, they stay busy, they consume endlessly, anything to avoid being fully present with themselves. But in 2026, distraction will stop working. The noise will increase, but satisfaction will decrease. People will have more information than ever and less wisdom than ever unless they choose consciousness. This is the dividing line Osho spoke of, not between good and bad, but between aware and unaware. Awakening does not promise comfort, it promises clarity, and clarity can be unsettling at first. You see patterns you once ignored. You recognize habits that drain you. You notice how often fear drives your decisions. But this seeing is not meant to punish you. It is meant to free you. The moment you become conscious, even a little, life begins to change quality. You may still face challenges, but you no longer drown in them. You may still feel fear, but it no longer controls you. You begin to live deliberately instead of reactively. And that single shift alters everything. Osho warned that those who refuse awakening would feel increasingly frustrated, anxious, and restless, not because something is wrong with them, but because life itself would push for awareness. Pain would intensify only to awaken intelligence. Confusion would grow only to invite clarity. This is why 2026 is not about success, achievement, or status. It is about consciousness, about whether you live mechanically or mindfully, about whether you meet life asleep or awake. Awakening does not require changing your life overnight. It begins with small moments of honesty, noticing your breath, observing your reactions, questioning your assumptions, pausing before responding. These are not small acts, they are revolutionary in an unconscious world. And here is the most important truth Osho left us with. Awakening is not something you achieve one day. It is something you choose again and again in ordinary moments, in how you speak, how you listen, how you act when no one is watching. The turning point is not the year. It is not the world. It is not the chaos around you. The turning point is whether you live this moment consciously or unconsciously. Because the quality of your life is not determined by what happens to you, but by the depth of awareness you bring to what happens. And when awareness becomes your way of living, fear naturally takes the last place, clarity takes the first. And life, exactly as it is, becomes enough. Something subtle is happening beneath the surface of the world. You can feel it in quiet moments, when the noise fades and the mind stops racing for just a second. A tension that isn't fear, yet isn't peace either. A sense that the old way of living no longer fits, but the new way hasn't fully revealed itself. This is not confusion by accident. This is a transition by design. Osho warned that humanity would arrive at a moment where outer progress would no longer compensate for inner emptiness, where speed would increase, but direction would be lost, where people would have more choices than ever, yet feel more trapped than before. He said the crisis would not look like collapse from the outside. It would feel like disconnection from the inside. And now that moment is here. Comfort was once the reward, safety was once the goal, stability was once the promise. But comfort, when stretched too long, becomes stagnation. When life no longer challenges your awareness, it begins to drain your vitality. You don't suffer loudly, you fade quietly. Days blend into each other, habits replace intention, survival replaces presence. In this phase, nothing is obviously wrong, yet nothing feels deeply right. You continue functioning, but you are no longer fully participating. And this is the most dangerous place to be. Not broken enough to change, not alive enough to feel fulfilled. Osho said comfort is useful only until it dulls consciousness. After that, it becomes the enemy of growth. When you stop being questioned by life, you stop questioning yourself. And a life without questions slowly becomes a life without meaning. That is why discomfort is rising. Not as punishment, but as correction. Something within you is refusing to cooperate with a version of life that no longer matches who you are becoming. The restlessness you feel is intelligence waking up. The dissatisfaction is not ingratitude. It is evolution asking for space. And as comfort loosens, identity begins to shake. You start questioning roles you once defended. Labels that once gave you confidence now feel restrictive. The image you worked hard to maintain starts feeling heavy, artificial, even exhausting. You realize how much energy it takes to keep being someone you no longer resonate with. This is where fear enters, because identity collapse feels like disappearance. The mind panics when it can no longer answer the question, "Who am I?" quickly. But Osho said the real self is never found in answers. It is found in awareness. Most identities are not discovered, they are inherited. From family expectations, from culture, from comparison, from fear of being nobody. And for a while these identities provide direction, but eventually they suffocate authenticity. In this phase, many people feel lost, not directionless, but undefined. Old motivations vanish, new ones haven't formed. This feels like emptiness, but it is actually openness. The space W, here something real can finally emerge. But before that happens, exhaustion appears, not the exhaustion of effort, the exhaustion of division. The tiredness that comes from living two lives at once, the outer life you present and the inner life you suppress. Every time you silence your truth to maintain harmony, energy leaks. Every time you ignore your inner signals to meet expectations, vitality drains. This exhaustion cannot be solved by rest alone, because it is not caused by overwork. It is caused by misalignment. You can sleep 8 hours and still wake up depleted. You can take breaks and still feel heavy. Because what is tired is not the body, it is the spirit. Osho said exhaustion is not weakness. It is wisdom refusing to be ignored. It is the soul's way of saying this path no longer serves us. And the more you resist this message, the louder it becomes. At this point, many people try to escape. They fill silence with noise. They replace awareness with stimulation. They look outward for answers. But noise only postpones clarity, and postponement deepens exhaustion. This is where silence enters, not as absence, but as presence. Silence is the space where you stop running, where you stop performing, where you stop explaining yourself, even internally. At first, silence feels uncomfortable because it removes distraction, and distraction has been protecting you from unresolved truths. In silence, thoughts slow down, emotions rise, old fears surface, and this scares people. But silence is not creating these things, it is revealing them, and what is revealed can finally be understood. Osho taught that silence is not withdrawal from life, it is preparation for conscious participation. Without silence you react, with silence you respond, without silence life controls you. With silence you meet life deliberately. As silence deepens, courage transforms, not the loud courage of rebellion, not the dramatic courage of confrontation, but the quiet courage of honesty, the courage to disappoint others rather than abandon yourself, the courage to walk alone without resentment, the courage to stop explaining your truth to those committed to misunderstanding it. This courage does not seek validation. It does not announce itself. It simply acts in alignment. And because it is rooted in awareness, it does not feel rushed or aggressive. It feels calm, grounded, certain. Osho said the greatest regret is not failure, it is living a life that was never truly yours. And this regret becomes unbearable once awareness rises. You can no longer unknow what you know. You can no longer pretend comfort equals fulfillment. This courage reshapes relationships. You stop using people to fill emptiness. You stop staying silent to keep peace. You stop clinging out of fear. Relationships either deepen through honesty or dissolve through clarity. And while this feels painful, it is also purifying, Conscious relationships are not based on need, they are based on presence. They allow space, they allow difference, they do not demand completion, and only those relationships can survive in a conscious world. As illusions fall away, one truth becomes unavoidable. Awakening is no longer optional. Life has become too complex for unconscious living. Reactions create chaos faster than ever. Decisions echo louder than before. Patterns repeat more intensely. And without awareness, suffering multiplies. Awakening does not mean becoming spiritual in appearance. It means becoming alert in ordinary moments, watching your reactions, observing your fears, noticing your habits, choosing deliberately instead of mechanically. Osho said awakening is not a destination, it is a way of walking, a continuous choice to be present rather than distracted, honest rather than comfortable, conscious rather than automatic. This is the real turning point, not the year, not the world, not the chaos outside, but whether you meet life asleep or awake. Because the quality of your life is not determined by how much you achieve, how much you own, or how much you impress. It is determined by how deeply you are present in your own existence. And when awareness becomes your way of living, fear loses its authority, clarity becomes natural, and life, exactly as it is, finally feels whole. There is a quiet tension in the air that words rarely capture. You feel it when you wake up before the alarm, staring at the ceiling, not anxious exactly, but alert in a way that feels unfamiliar. You feel it when achievements no longer excite you the way they used to, when conversations feel repetitive, when distractions stop working. Something is shifting and no amount of pretending can fully cover it anymore. This is not coincidence, this is convergence. Osho warned that humanity would eventually arrive at a moment where outer progress would race ahead, but inner understanding would lag dangerously behind. He said people would have more tools, more information, more freedom than ever, and yet feel strangely imprisoned, not by governments or systems, but by their own unconscious patterns. That moment is no longer approaching. It is here. For a long time, comfort was mistaken for success. Stability was treated as the highest goal. Predictability was sold as peace. People organized their lives around minimizing discomfort, avoiding uncertainty, and keeping everything under control. And for a while this worked, at least on the surface. But comfort has a shadow side that no one talks about. When life becomes too predictable, awareness falls asleep. You stop listening, you stop questioning, you stop feeling deeply. Days pass, routines repeat, and slowly, without drama, your inner fire dims. Not because life is cruel, but because it has become too safe to awaken you. This is why so many people today feel strangely empty in lives that look perfectly fine. Nothing is obviously wrong, yet something essential feels missing. The soul is not nourished by convenience. It is nourished by meaning, presence, and growth never happens in comfort alone. That is why discomfort is increasing, not as punishment, but as correction. The unease you feel is not a flaw in your life, it is intelligence trying to wake you up. It is your deeper self refusing to cooperate with a version of living that has outgrown its purpose. And when comfort begins to lose its grip, the next thing that trembles is identity. You start questioning who you've been pretending to be. The roles you once wore proudly now feel tight, artificial, exhausting. The labels that once gave you direction begin to feel like cages. You realize how much of your life has been shaped by expectation rather than awareness. Most identities are not chosen, they are absorbed from family narratives, from social compare, Ison, from fear of being invisible. And while these identities provide structure early on, they eventually suffocate authenticity. They require constant maintenance, constant performance, constant validation. This is why people feel drained even when they are doing well. Carrying a false self is heavy work. When identity starts dissolving, fear naturally arises. The mind panics when it can no longer answer the question, "Who am I?" Quickly equates not knowing with danger. But Osho taught that not knowing is not emptiness, it is openness. It is the space where truth can finally enter. This phase feels like being between worlds. You are no longer comfortable in the old story, but the new one hasn't revealed itself yet. Motivation drops, certainty fades, and many mistake this for failure, when in reality it is transformation. But transformation is tiring. This is where exhaustion appears. Not the exhaustion of effort, but the exhaustion of inner conflict. The tiredness that comes from living out of alignment, from saying yes when something inside resists, from suppressing truth to maintain harmony, from continuing paths that no longer resonate. This exhaustion cannot be fixed by sleep or rest alone, because it is not physical, it is existential. The body is willing, but the spirit is no longer convinced. You feel heavy even in stillness, you feel restless even in comfort. And the more you push through it, the louder it becomes. Osho said, exhaustion is the soul's protest. It is life saying, this way of living is no longer honest. And honesty, once awakened, cannot be silenced for long. Many people try to escape this phase. They fill every quiet moment with noise. They chase stimulation. They distract themselves endlessly. But distraction does not heal. It delays. And delay only deepens the fatigue. This is why silence becomes essential. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of afference. It is the moment you stop running from yourself. At first, silence feels uncomfortable because it removes anesthesia. Thoughts rise, emotions surface, old fears knock on the door, and most people retreat at this point, calling silence unsettling. But silence is not unsettling, it is honest. In silence, you begin to see how reactive you've been, how often fear has driven your decisions, how much energy you've spent maintaining appearances. This seeing is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating, because what is seen clearly can finally be released. Osho taught that silence is power because it restores choice. Without silence, you react. With silence, you respond. Without silence, life pulls you around. With silence, you meet life consciously. As silence deepens, courage changes shape. It no longer looks dramatic. It no longer needs witnesses. It no longer seeks approval. Courage becomes quiet alignment, the courage to be misunderstood, the courage to walk away without bitterness, the courage to disappoint others rather than abandon yourself. This courage does not shout, it does not argue, it does not prove, it simply lives in truth. Osho said the deepest regret a human can carry is not failure but self-betrayal. And once awareness rises, self-betrayal becomes unbearable. You can no longer pretend comfort equals fulfillment. You can no longer silence your inner voice without feeling the cost immediately. This courage reshapes relationships. You stop using people to fill emptiness. You stop staying out of fear. You stop confusing attachment with love. Relationships either evolve through honesty or dissolve through clarity. And while this feels painful, it is also purifying. Conscious relationships are spacious. They allow freedom. They do not cling. They do not complete. They meet as two whole beings, not two wounds leaning on each other. And only such relationships can survive in a conscious world. As illusions fall away, one truth becomes unavoidable. Awakening is no longer optional. Life has become too fast, too complex, too interconnected for unconscious living. Reactions spiral quickly. Decisions echo loudly. Old coping mechanisms fail. And without awareness, suffering multiplies. Awakening does not mean becoming spiritual in appearance. It means becoming alert in ordinary moments. Watching your reactions instead of being possessed by them. Noticing your habits instead of defending them. Choosing deliberately instead of automatically. Osho said awakening is not something you achieve once. It is something you practice continuously. In how you listen, in how you speak, in how you respond when no one is watching. This is the real turning point. Not a date on the calendar, not a global event, not a prediction, but whether you live consciously or mechanically, because the quality of your life is not determined by how much you accumulate, how much you impress, or how much you control. It is determined by how deeply you are present in your own existence. And when awareness becomes your way of living, fear naturally loosens its grip. Clarity becomes your companion. And life, exactly as it is, finally feels enough. And remember this, no year, no system, no person has the power to decide the quality of your life. That power has always been placed inside you by something far greater than fear. When you live unconsciously, life feels heavy. When you live with awareness and faith, life begins to carry you. Faith is not blind belief. Faith is the courage to trust that when you walk in truth, the path will appear. When you choose consciousness, guidance follows. When you honor your inner values, confusion slowly dissolves. You were never meant to live in constant struggle. You were meant to live awake. So don't wait for the world to calm down. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for permission. Begin where you are, with honesty, presence, and courage. Even a small step taken consciously changes the direction of your entire life. Because when you put your inner values, your God, your truth, your awareness at the center of your life, fear naturally moves to the edges. And when fear steps aside, clarity leads, purpose follows, peace becomes possible. The world may be uncertain, but your awareness can be steady. The future may feel unclear, but your faith can be firm. Live consciously, act courageously, trust deeply. That is how life opens its doors.